We're skipping a bunch of slides. Where's your notes? We've covered the basics of taxonomy in general, sort of the taxonomic levels, scientific names, and so forth. Where we're going next is a brief overview of the 6 kingdoms. Then we're going to start talking about each kingdom one at a time. Some of them we'll go over very quickly, like bacteria, archaea. And then others will take more time, protists, plants, animals. So to start, we said, what's the top level of classification? The most general category? Domain. Every single living thing is just in one of 3 domains. So it's very broad, very general. Below that, what do we have? Kingdom. Also very broad. Every living thing is placed into one of just 6 kingdoms. Okay? And some of them you're familiar with, some you may not be familiar with. So we'll start with the ones you probably are. If we look down here, first of all, feel free to draw some shorts on this guy. I don't know why he does that on. But anyway, what kingdom are these organisms?
Bacteria. Animal? Wait, which one? Phylum.
This one.
Phylum.
Animal.
Which, listen to my question, which kingdom are these organisms?
Animal.
Yes, they're all animals. They're in the animal kingdom. Okay, how about the flowers, the cactus, the tree? Obviously, plants. That's a kingdom. These mushrooms.
Fungi.
I haven't called that before. Because I'm a fungi.
A fungi.
Bacteria. Bacteria.
Bad jokes for the win. All right. How about this group? One you're probably...
Bacteria.
No. These are, I would guess maybe you've heard of one of these. This is the protist kingdom. This is an amoeba. Have you heard of an amoeba?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one I would guess. We're going to spend a fair amount of time. We're going to look at 3 different living protists probably next week. And then we get to 2 kingdoms that are sort of combined here.
It's like the
Yeah, these are, what are we missing?
Bacteria.
Yeah, bacteria. And then there's another one that's called archaea. Okay, and we'll talk about those 2 in more detail probably tomorrow. Right back. Done. All right, so those are 6 kingdoms. And what we're going to talk about today is sort of the very general characteristics of each of those kingdoms. And we're going to use sort of 3 main criteria. The first is whether or not the organisms in this kingdom have a nucleus in their cells. Okay. So there's terms that we use here, and we can break them down to understand. If you're reading a book, where do you find the prologue?
beginning.
Yeah, it's like before the story starts. This prefix pro means before. The prefix u means true. And the root kario means having to do with the nucleus.
Carryover.
So we have 2 categories of living things, prokaryotes and eukaryotes. So what do you think prokaryotes are? Alex? That's what it means. So what would you guess that would mean about these organisms?
It's organism that does not have.
Correct. These are very, very simple living things that are single-celled, and they have no nucleus. They also don't have other membrane-bound organelles. They don't have chloroplasts, mitochondria, things like that. They have no nuclear membrane. They're very simple things. They still have DNA, but it's not contained within a nucleus. It's kind of spread throughout the cytoplasm. Well, well, the nuclear membrane is what defines the nucleus, so both. do you think? You look at your own cheek cells. Are we prokaryotes?
No.
No, because we stay in the nucleus of our cells, remember? We saw the nucleus. We are eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are organisms that have more complex cells. They do have a nuclear membrane. They do have other membrane-bound organelles. They're usually much larger than prokaryotic cells. So this is a big criteria we use when we put things into one of the 6 kingdoms. Kelly?
These one of the kingdoms was protists. Does that mean they're protic?
No. It's a little confusing, but no, they're not. What?
How is the 6 and 7 opposed to the 6?
I couldn't hear you.
No.
All right. The other category, another category we use is how many cells one organism is made out of. Living things are classified as they're being unicellular or multicellular. What does uni mean? One. Like a unicycle. These are single-celled organisms. Then multicellular. What do you think that means? Yeah, they are made of many cells. How they obtain food is another criteria we use. And you know, we've talked about autotrophs and heterotrophs before. Auto means self. Troph means food. Hetero means other. So what is an autotroph? Yeah, something makes its own food. It literally means self-feeding. An organism that can make, how can an organism make its own food? Yeah, through photosynthesis. So autotrophs are organisms that make their own food through photosynthesis. Things like plants. And then how about a heterotroph?
They find other.
Yeah, it means literally other food. They have to eat other organisms, break down other organisms in order to get food. So we're going to talk about the 6 kingdoms and go through these 3 criteria for each one so that we can understand what their main characteristics are. And you could probably do this pretty well for plants and animals. So if we think about animals, let's first think about number of cells. Raise your hand if you can tell me, what word will we use to describe the animal kingdom in terms of the number of cells? Anthony? They're multicellular, correct. Animals are made of many cells. What word will we use in terms of their nucleus? Jennifer? Yep, they're eukaryotes. They do have a nucleus in their cells. Like I said, we saw that when we looked at cheek cells. One way to help you remember, because sometimes people get confused, you rhymes with do, because eukaryotes do have a nucleus. Pro rhymes with no, because they have no nucleus. How about food? Emily? They're heterotrophs, yeah. They have to eat other organisms. That's how they get food. The animal kingdom is the largest kingdom of identified species. And, you know, we could list lots of examples here, but some examples: spider, a penguin, a cat. But even some very simple things that you may not associate with being an animal: sponge, jellyfish, starfish. Those are animals. A worm.
Sponge?
Living
No,
things.
sponge is like a plant.
Yeah. That's lies.
This is a leftover
Wait,
skeleton
wait, are
of an animal.
that's not just plants?
Nope, this is a sponge. It's an animal.
No, so
Wait, is that like
lies.
inside?
This is its skeleton, basically.
Yeah, that's why
So it has
It's all,
like
the living parts are dead. This is what's left over.
What's the animal called?
It's called a sponge.
Yes.
What does it
It's like
eat?
SpongeBob.
What does it
It's like
eat?
SpongeBob.
Oh, mine
They're
was,
filter feeders. They suck water in through all these holes, and as they expel it, they filter out little bits of bacteria and plants and produce.
You know, you see the one
okay.
episode where it does
What
that
is
like
a
the whole
head?
time? He's like, oh,
Look at that. They live in water.
Yeah, they're all in the water.
Big bang.
All right, plants.
You're all gonna drink.
Another kingdom. So, tell me, raise your hand if you can tell me number of cells. Amna? No? Think of a tree. Is a tree a single cell? Multi-cell. You looked at plant cells. You drew plant cells. Tell me about the nucleus. What word should we use to describe plants? Willa? Did you see a nucleus when you stain an onion cell? Yes, they have a nucleus. They're eukaryotes. How about how they obtain nutrition? Alex? Autotroph. Yes. Tree, corn, algae, grass. These are all plants. All right, now we start to get into some less familiar territory. Fungi. They include mushrooms, but also some other things that you maybe didn't realize. So, fungi, unicellular or multicellular? Mostly, but there's an exception. So all these mushrooms, they're multicellular. But yeast, which is a fungus, is unicellular. They have complex cells. They're eukaryotes. About nutrition. Bella? When your teacher pauses, do you guys automatically switch your answer? Yes?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
I'm going to start pausing even on the correct answer, so take that. I don't know. Is it?
Is
Think
it
about
both? Is it both?
it's autotroph.
All right, who's confident and can sort of explain why you're confident? Calvin?
It's autotroph because it takes the nutrients from the ground.
All right, does anyone disagree? Megan?
Well, it breaks down organisms that have died.
Okay, so what are you saying?
Like they eat off of
Right, but are you saying heterotroph or autotroph?
heterotroph.
Okay. Bella?
Well, I mean, like the mold, that grows off of things, so could it be both?
No. They are heterotrophs. They do consume other organisms, and Megan was right. They break down, and Calvin, you were right in terms of, yeah, they absorb nutrients from breaking down dead things, waste material, but that's another organism, so they are heterotrophs.
Oh, come on.
So examples, they're called decomposers. Because they do that, they break down waste and dead organisms, they're considered a type of decomposer. And an example, yeast, mushrooms, also things like mildew, mold,
Ugh.
okay? Those are all types of fungus. If your bread gets moldy, that's a fungus.
Nothing is better than moldy cheese.
I always hate mold.
Yeah, also,
Cheese is
sometimes there's mold, there are fungus in cheese. Blue cheese is blue because of the spores of special types of fungi. Yeast is used to make bread, to make beer and wine.
Oh yeah.
So, yeast.
No,
I don't know. I'm sure you could make cookies with yeast.
Then they'll be doughy and they'll rise.
Yeah, there are. I don't know if a cookie.
Yeah,
Yeah, yes, a pizza cookie. All right.
Totally a pizza.
Protists. Protists are unicellular. They're single-celled organisms, but they're complex single-celled organisms. They're still eukaryotes. And there are some protists that are heterotrophs, some are autotrophs, some can do either one. And the one I would guess you've heard of is this one. That's an amoeba. Have you heard of an amoeba?
Yes.
No.
The others that we're going to look at next week are called paramecium and euglena. Called-
What is plankton called?
Plankton as a plant.
Oh, really?
There's a combination. There's like colonial ones. So there's different types. Like plankton is like a broad category, and not a specific like organism. All right, and then we have two more kingdoms left: bacteria and archaea. Bacteria, unicellular or multi? Unicellular. They are very simple, single-celled organisms, very small. You want to guess? Eukaryote or prokaryote? Correct.
Wait, what's the difference again?
Prokaryotes don't have a nucleus. So inside a bacterial cell, there's no nuclear membrane holding all the DNA. The DNA is just inside the cytoplasm. Heterotroph or autotroph? They can actually be both. Some are autotroph, some are heterotroph. So examples we named in our question of the day: E. coli, Salmonella, Streptococcus, Staphylococcus. Cyanobacteria is a type of autotrophic bacteria. All right, now we have one last kingdom that you probably have never heard of: archaea. Archaea was discovered much more recently than any of the other kingdoms. It was in the late 1970s that the first members of this kingdom were discovered, and it was not until the 1990s when scientists made it its own kingdom. It's going to sound similar to bacteria in these categories. It is unicellular, prokaryote, autotrophic, and these organisms were first found in places like geysers, in these very, very extreme conditions, where scientists thought nothing could be living in this almost boiling hot water. But they actually found living organisms there that belong to this archaea kingdom. So they're often called extremophiles, organisms that live in extreme conditions. Some can survive in extreme heat. They're called thermophiles. Others can survive very acidic conditions. But they also live in normal conditions. Scientists originally thought they only lived in extreme conditions. Since then, in the last 20 years, they found they live everywhere as they examined the soil and other things more closely. So that is called archaea. Alex?
So is this like a small organism or a big?
It's tiny. They're tiny microscopic prokaryotes, so really small. So if we look at the overall identified species, the vast majority of species that scientists have identified are animals. Almost 3/4 of them. The next largest is plants, this section, and then fungi, and then the others are much smaller. Now that's not necessarily because there's less of them, it's just easier to find and identify the larger organisms.